This episode is brought to you by Hasa. Liquid is clearly better. Liquid chlorine is the highest purity, works immediately, has no added cyanuric acid or calcium, and it will leave your pool safe, clean, and clear. And by the bottom feeder professional grade battery powered vacuum system. It sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off with code DVB100.
This episode is brought to you by Skimmer, the #1 pool service software in North America. With Skimmer, you can streamline your schedule, grow your revenue, and keep your customers coming back with 5-star service. Whether you're a one-person operation or an established team, Skimmer is your partner in success. Visit getskimmer.com/poolguy to try Skimmer for free for 30 days.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Hey, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to talk to you about Trichlor, chlorine tablets, or pucks, as some people call them. And I'm going to go over all the things you need to know about Trichlor tablets and the use in your swimming pool care. Are you a pool service pro looking to take your business to the next level? Join the Pool Guy Coaching Program. Get expert advice, business tips, exclusive content, and get direct support. From me, I'm a 35-year veteran in the industry. Whether you're starting out or scaling up, I've got the tools to help you succeed. Learn more at swimmingpoollearning.com. If you've been doing pool service as long as I have, Trichlor actually wasn't super popular when I started in 1988. Chlorine gas was still a very popular sanitizer. There were trucks going around. They would get to a pool, they would pump the gas in and leave. They were there for like 3 or 4 minutes. And it was a very popular service back in the 80s. Trichlor was starting to catch on, and pool pros started using Trichlor tablets. Probably the 90s is when it really took off. 2000s, of course. And right now, I think it is the most popular way of sanitizing a pool. There's really no statistics out there, but I would say maybe 50% of pool owners are using Trichlor tablets. It's just a guess at this point. So what are Trichlor tablets? Well, Trichlor tablets are trichlorocyanuric acid, and these basically have 90% available chlorine. So they have the highest available chlorine of any chlorine type out there. These are a very strong chlorine type, obviously. The drawback, of course, even though they're 90% available chlorine, they're not instant. In other words, the tablets, if your pool has 0 chlorine and you have algae forming, you can't put 4 tablets in the floater and call it a day, because the fact that they dissolve slowly in the water and release chlorine slowly, even though they have the most chlorine, they're not going to be effective in that situation. Now, there, of course, is the granular trichlor. The Hasa algae is very popular, and it's something that you want to use with caution. And I'll touch on the granular trichlor later. I'm going to focus on tablets right now because these are the ones that are widely used by everyone. The tablets come in different brands. There's all different makers or manufacturers. Biolab is probably the #1 manufacturer of Trichlor tablets. And all of us remember when that Biolab factory burned down right before COVID, causing a shortage of chlorine because they were one of the only producers, I think, left for the Trichlor tablets. You weren't really getting a lot of them from overseas, and a lot of the factories were closing. And the Trichlor price is still somewhat inflated. I'm not sure if it's a supply issue per se, but when prices go up, and I've talked about this before, with any kind of product, the only one I think where there's an exception is probably eggs. I mean, eggs went up to I think it was like $9 a dozen, a year ago or so. Now they're back to $2. So that's one commodity that does drop in price a lot. But if you get gas in California, which is ridiculously high right now, it's like over $6 a gallon at some places. And so the gas will maybe drop down to a previous level, but it's not going to go back down to like $2 a gallon. It probably would never happen in my lifetime. And the same effect has happened with the Trichlor tablets. It went up to a price point, I think it was well over $250 at the peak for a 50-pound bucket. And now it's back down to a reasonable level, but it won't get back down to $80 wholesale probably in a very long time. It's just one of those things where, again, there's more than just supply and demand that goes into the price point of things. There's the employment fees, or the cost of employees. I don't know why I said fees, but the cost of employees, the cost of fuel, all these operation costs have, of course, increased because everything has gone up over the last few years. And of course, the production that BioLab can produce now has gone down. There's no official numbers, but I think they're probably down about 50 to 70% over their pre-COVID production. Before the factory burned down, they were producing a lot more. There's more restrictions, and so there's less trichlor being produced, which does affect the supply, but I think there's plenty of trichlor out there. It's just that the price has gone up and now it's not going back down at this point. So let me talk a little bit about the trichlor tablets themselves. You may not know this, and this is not something that they advertise, even though the name of the product, trichlorocyanuric acid, the word cyanuric acid is actually in the trichlor name of the product. So every chlorine product has a byproduct. Liquid chlorine, you're adding salt as a byproduct. Everything in nature has a byproduct, by the way. Calhypo, the byproduct is calcium. Then you have dichlor, with the byproduct being cyanuric acid as well. And trichlor, the byproduct is cyanuric acid. How much cyanuric acid are you adding to the pool when you're putting one trichlor tablet in there? About half of the weight of the tablet is cyanuric acid. So if you're using an 8-ounce tablet in your pool, about 4 ounces of cyanuric acid is being added to the pool when you add a trichlor tablet. The thing that to understand is that can't be separated. You can't have a trichlor tablet without cyanuric acid. It wouldn't be a trichlor tablet at that point, because that is the chemical makeup of the product itself. And this is something that you have to understand about trichlor, is that as you're using these tablets in your pool, you are adding more cyanuric acid to the pool as you're putting the trichlor tablets in. I could just give you a simple math equation so you can get an idea of how much cyanuric acid you're adding to the pool. But if you had a 50-pound bucket of trichlor, about half that weight is cyanuric acid. So if you use that entire bucket in your pool during one season, that means you're adding about 25 pounds of cyanuric acid to the pool water, which is a lot more cyanuric acid than the pool needs. And there's ways to combat this. You can do a partial drain during the season. You can use less tablets, of course, which will allow you not to add as much cyanuric acid to the water. But basic mathematics is that you're adding a large amount of cyanuric acid to the pool when you're using trichlor tablets as your primary sanitizer for your pool. So what is the drawback of having so much cyanuric acid in the pool? I mean, is it any different than liquid chlorine adding salt or calhypo adding calcium? There is a slight difference, and it is the fact that out of all the byproducts, cyanuric acid is one that affects your ability to balance the pool more than having salt or calcium in the water. It makes it harder to maintain a free chlorine level that is effective in the pool. The more cyanuric acid that's in the water, the slower the chlorine is in reacting to algae, microorganisms. Now it's fractional. It's not a huge amount of difference, but it's enough to make the free chlorine ineffective in a lot of cases if the cyanuric acid level is really high in the pool. If you follow Bob Lowry's material, and I preach it here, he has a formula of 7.5% free chlorine to your cyanuric acid level. So if your cyanuric acid level is 100 parts per million, you need to have 7.5 parts per million of free chlorine in the pool for that chlorine to be effective. And that's a minimum level, by the way, not like an actual level. It's a really complicated formula he came up with, and so he has these minimum levels that he set based on his research. So 8 parts per million, just to make it simple, would be what you need to have in a pool with 100 parts per million of cyanuric acid. It's a lot of chlorine, but a lot of that, of course, is locked up in the cyanuric acid, and it's something to be aware of, that the trichlor tablets are raising the cyanuric acid level in the pool as you're using them. So is this high cyanuric acid level inherently a bad thing? In a way it is, in a way it's not, because there are things you can do to keep the cyanuric acid level lower in your pool. You can, of course, again, do a partial drain every month. That will lower the water. And by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this, I probably didn't, but cyanuric acid doesn't evaporate out of the pool. And that's why draining the pool is the only way to lower the level. I should have stated that. But a partial drain will allow you to lower the cyanuric acid level down in the pool. So there are ways to combat the cyanuric acid being added to the pool. You can also use less trichlor tablets. You can maybe use one trichlor tablet and then supplement that with liquid chlorine or cal hypo during the week. And that way you're not adding too many trichlor tablets to the pool, and the cyanuric acid buildup will be a lot lower. If you're in an area where you get 40 inches of rain during your rainy season, like Hawaii and, of course, parts of Texas, Florida, you wouldn't have to worry too much about the high cyanuric acid after the season ends, because the water will be diluted quite a bit with the rain in those areas where you get a lot of rain. So dilution and, of course, draining the pool. And cyanuric acid does degrade by itself over time, and it's something that if there's a way to counter it, it's not inherently a bad thing. Just like if you have diabetes and if you take a lot of sugar out of your diet, you're combating it. It's a bad thing, but there's ways, of course, to mitigate things. And same with cyanuric acid. There's ways to lower cyanuric acid in your pool. And the Pool Guy Podcast Show has teamed up with UPA to bring you affordable, reliable liability insurance starting at just $64 a month. Get up to $2 million in coverage, and the members of my coaching group get an even lower rate. Protect your business and your peace of mind. Sign up with UPA today by clicking the link in the podcast description. I think the hardest thing with trichlor tablets is actually getting the right dosage for your pool. There's so many factors that are involved in dosing that you have to. There was a company that contacted me one time, and they wanted to manufacture a Trichlor chlorinator, offline chlorinator by the equipment. And they asked me how much chlorine is released by the Trichlor tablet. And I told them it's really hard to get an exact amount of chlorine. Some people say 2 ounces is released in a certain amount of time, and that gives you free parts per million of 5 or 6, whatever. But the problem is it depends on the water temperature. It depends on how long you're running your pool. If you have an inline chlorinator, if you have a floater in the pool, all these are factors in how much trichlor is released. If you have a chlorinator and you put 5 tablets in there, of course you're going to have a really high chlorine level if you run the pool 24 hours. If you have 5 tablets in there and you have to dial down to 1 and you're running your pool 5 hours a day, you're not going to have as much chlorine being put into the pool from the trichlor dissolving in the chlorinator, because it's dissolving at a slower rate. All these are factors that are hard to determine, and that's why it's trial and error basically with trichlor tablets. If you have a 15,000 gallon pool, you can put 2 tablets in a floater and see if that maintains the chlorine level at 5 parts per million. If the water temperature is in the 60s, that's not going to happen. If the water temperature is in the 90s, you may have too much chlorine being added to the pool at that point. So it's a really fluid, kind of evolving chlorine sanitizer type that you really can't peg down and say, if you have a 15,000 gallon pool, put 2 tablets in the floater and it's going to maintain 5 parts per million. There's other factors involved that make that really impossible to determine. And that's why a lot of times when you're using trichlor tablets, you'll test the pool and you're going to be at 10 parts per million of free chlorine, because it's hard to gauge that. Or if you have a 20,000 gallon pool and you put 1 tablet in the floater, chances are you're going to have 0 parts per million of chlorine, because that's not enough trichlor dissolving in the pool to add enough chlorine to that body of water. So it's one of those things where, as a pool professional, you kind of learn how many tablets to use on your route based on the pool size, the water temperature, where the chlorinator is at. And these are all factors that affect how much chlorine is being put into the water at that point. And of course, factor in the cyanuric acid level as well. And you have to keep that at 7.5% of your free chlorine level. And all of this makes it really difficult to use trichlor as the primary sanitizer without using liquid chlorine or cal hypo to raise that chlorine level up in the pool. Another thing about trichlor is that since it's cyanuric acid, it is an acid. So there are some cautions that you have to keep in mind with using trichlor tablets. Number one, don't put them in the skimmer basket, because what happens when the pool turns off, all that cyanuric acid will build up in the skimmer. When you turn the pool on, a big amount of really low acidic water will pass through the system and back out the return lines, sometimes leaving stains on the return lines, sometimes leaving stains from the main drain of the pool. Of course, your skimmer is stained brown from all the acid in there. You just don't want to put trichlor tablets into the skimmer. A floater is perfectly fine in the pool. Try tying that to somewhere, maybe on a rail or to the skimmer lid, because if that goes over the first step in the pool, and everyone's seen this in pool service, if you have a chlorinator and it's like just roaming the pool, sometimes it gets stuck on the step area. So that first step's going to have a little circular burn on it permanently from the floater sitting right over that first step, and all the acid coming out of the bottom from the tablet dissolving in the pool. Another thing to also avoid is having these fall out into the pool. There was one person, I don't know, someone had told me the story that they hired a new pool tech and they were just chucking him in the pool like, hockey pucks, and they were just going into the deep end, the shallow end, because no one told him he had to put these tablets into a floater or a chlorinator, because he probably didn't know how long it takes for them to dissolve in the pool. He probably thought they were like Alka-Seltzer in water. Does anyone ever use that still? But it's one of those things where you just toss them in there and you think they're going to dissolve, but they actually will stain and burn the bottom of the pool. So if you have an employee, definitely train them and mention at some point the tablets don't just get chucked into the pool. Put them in a floater or put them in the chlorinator, and that way you don't stain the pool. So they do have a staining property because of the acid that's part of the cyanuric acid. I think the pH of the tablet is like around 2.7, so it's a really low pH. And that's why a lot of times when you're using them in a pool, the pH kind of stays very stable in a pool with trichlor tablets. If you have a vinyl or fiberglass pool and using trichlor tablets in there, of course, the side effect is that the pH starts to drop rapidly in that pool because there's not a huge acid demand for fiberglass or for the vinyl pool. And that's why a lot of manufacturers will actually void the warranty on a fiberglass pool if you use trichlor tablets in a floater or if you install an inline chlorinator, because it lowers the pH down to a very corrosive level on those pool surface types. And lastly, the granular trichlor that I mentioned at the beginning, you want to use that sparingly. It is actually very fast acting, but it does have the staining properties that I mentioned that the tablet has, because it has a very low pH and it has acid in them. So if you throw it into a pool and it settles on the bottom of let's say a colored plaster pool, or if you put it in a vinyl pool, which you shouldn't use, by the way, the granular trichlor in a vinyl pool or a fiberglass pool, because it could burn the surface and stain it really badly. But most pool surfaces can still be stained by it. So even a plaster pool with white plaster can get some brown, yellow stains from burning the plaster. PebbleTech pools as well. So use it cautiously. A little bit goes a long way. So if you're treating black algae with it, or really aggressive mustard algae, just use a little bit of it, sprinkle it into the pool where you can barely see it on the bottom. If you pile it up in areas, it's going to cause a burn in the plaster. And so I definitely would recommend experimenting on a pool that's already, toasted with cracked plaster and it looks terrible, has stains on it, and kind of get the handle on how to use the granular trichlor before you actually go out there and use it on a regular pool. And you probably have pools on your route that fit that bill where the plaster is pretty wasted already. Of course, use it with caution, but you can kind of test out your skill with it before you kind of use it in the real world situation where you can actually damage someone's pool. And I would caution you to use the granular trichlor very sparingly until you become more or less an expert using it. If you're looking for other podcasts, you can find those on my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. Click on the podcast icon and the banner. That'll bring you to a drop-down menu with over 1,900 podcasts there. And if you're interested in the coaching program that I offer, you can learn more at poolguidecoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.